No problem. When you guys are ready. Okay, that's quick introduction for those who haven't met me before. Name's Stephen Oshinowo, right? Basically, what I intend on you guys getting out of this course is a genuine development of, a different type of approach to projects and to project execution, project delivery from a performance perspective, and also an approach or methodology of how to apply different skill sets to the everyday life of a planner. So that obviously would involve a development of a unique set of skills, right? Which over the course, obviously, you will, most likely develop depending on your desire to want to obviously develop that skill. So the idea is, it's based on how I do things, basically. And the reason for that is, my approach to things differ to the orthodox way of, applying project planning practice to problem solving, yeah? And the one question I would expect you guys to always ask yourselves at the beginning of any task or activity, situation that you may be required to perform would be to ask yourself the question from two different perspectives. And, the term would be that an uncreative thinker can ultimately spot a wrong answer quite easily, right? But a creative thinker can spot the wrong question. Now, just from your general understanding of that particular perspective, why do I have it the other way around? First things first. If any of you feels, you kind of want to take a stab at it before we obviously kick on, because that would obviously give me an idea as to your method of critical thinking. So, anyone want to take a stab at it? Creative thinker or uncreative? So, uncreative thinker does what? Spots the wrong answer. Creative thinker spots the wrong question. Just from a critical thinking perspective, can you just kind of outline why? Big picture.
His thinking is proactive.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think the creative thinker thinks about the question in the bigger picture, and he looks at reasons why an answer's not right, not only right, but could be wrong. So I think look at both sides of it.
Okay. Anybody else? The idea here is critical thinking's what? You criticize, obviously from a hypothesis perspective. Okay, so you strip it back down. The term that I'm looking for is root cause. Okay, the idea is obviously from the perspective of an uncreative thinker or uncreative person who doesn't involve strategy in whatever it is they do, right? The reason for that is the answer's already wrong, right? So it doesn't take a genius to obviously identify that you haven't hit your targets, you haven't hit optimum, performance perspectives, KPIs, etc., etc. So you strip it right back down, right? You've got to understand that in order to perform practices in daily business, situations, you have to perform a series of tasks, and those series of tasks are obviously in the form of inputs into a particular system. You think about a system from the perspective of a process, so a series of processes make up a system, series of systems make up a what? Framework, and a framework obviously makes up a sub-function. So performance of those framework systems down to processes, day in, day out, is what business is about, okay? So if you take it out of the context of the business and you bring it right back down to a project, obviously what it is, I'm sure quite a few of you have obviously been through the whole project management definition of what a project is, which is a temporary endeavor, that is performed to either what? Solve a problem, provide a solution from the perspective of trying to achieve what the customer wants or all the stakeholders. Ideally, it's got a start and it's got an end. The difference between a project and a program is just a series of different projects, but the program basically means that it's a collection of the organization's performance of different systems to achieve different results or variable results. Do you understand? It just depends on what the actual project is based on. What are the objectives of that project from, say, for instance, a business perspective? Is it to increase performance? Is it to level up productivity? Is it to drive change? So the understanding is that you need to understand from your perspective that you will have, at the end of whatever it is that I give you, you would have a perspective of how to manage change from a totally different approach, okay? So I always say strategy is what develops, okay? But strategy also is unique. Why? Because you need to differentiate what operational effectiveness is from strategy, right? Operative or operations effectiveness is basically a particular individual or a particular group of individuals who obviously make up a project team, perform tasks, activities based on a particular niche, right? Or a series of different niches that they're attending to. So, for instance, we say that GlaxoSmithKline, they perform various different manufacturing tasks to feed into quite a few different niche markets, basically, for kids, for adults, etc., etc. Okay? So, the idea here is operational effectiveness for them will probably be at the optimum level about between 60 to 90%. The reason for that is that these guys are obviously best class, right? So you look at the likes of Procter & Gamble, they're on the same path as, the GlaxoSmithKlines, right? Glaxo's into pharmaceuticals and all sorts of other healthcare / daily endeavors, right? So you look at both of them and you say to yourself, obviously, do both those companies have operational effectiveness? The answer is yes. But they look alike. Why? Because they do the same processes. They, operate at relatively minimal profit, right? The reason why I'm trying to approach it from an organization perspective for you guys is to understand that your responsibility and accountability in this new field that you're going into is always global. So you have to think about it from a big picture perspective, not just for the task that you're being asked to do. Because ultimately, the key goal is to achieve project delivery, okay? And the idea of achieving project delivery is not based on you performing your job to the right standards, but it has to be performed to the right quality standards. Who defines the quality of your work? It would always be the customer or the employer or the client. Those words, as we proceed, will be used interchangeably. The reason for that is, from different perspectives, different industries, different disciplines, that word will be called different things, depending on where you end up in the discipline of planning. Okay, so always understand that the key drivers to obviously what you as a planner, so to speak, ideally would need to hone in on is your ability to deliver your accountable tasks, your responsibilities, using a strategy that is unique to you, unique to problem solving. What I don't find within this industry is that you have individuals who believe or have this notion of project management being the be-all and end-all of how to manage a project. But then they forget the key term that a project manager is associated with is he is just a facilitator. He doesn't necessarily understand all of the processes to get that particular endeavor or temporary endeavor or series of activities or tasks in whatever discipline it is from start to finish. Why? If he was a project manager, you're managing people, isn't it? So you're facilitating, right? Now, what this discipline of planning does, it separates you from the title of project manager. Why? Because every endeavor, as we have said, starts and it finishes, right? So if something starts, you have a constraint time for it to be delivered, what happens is eventually you're going to have to do what? Attach a cost to it, attach resources to it, both from an internal and an external perspective. Now, let's say stakeholder identification will be one of the ways in which you identify internally and externally. But collectively, the project is always about people, it's about satisfying and also managing expectation. And that's in essence what the project manager does. But ideally, that's all he ever does. Why? Because all he does is facilitate process, system, framework, delivery. Okay? Whether or not he performs these tasks to the right quality, who's to judge on that? If you don't have the right management systems in place to actually measure performance, measure productivity, then ideally you'll be unable, obviously from a company perspective, to measure what a project manager's perspective or what the level of effort that he puts into his actual practice. But when you then attach a particular time frame in which you have to deliver, and you have to deliver to the right quality, the right scope, and by scope I mean all of the objectives of that endeavor. The endeavor, as I said, is, say for instance, we give an example. We want to deploy new software, right, that would increase a business function, for instance, HR, right? So we engage the likes of Oracle, okay, customer relationship management systems. We engage the likes of, I don't know any other software companies, but yeah, you can kind of get the drift. So the idea is, from within the business, we've identified a particular software company which ideally satisfies all of our requirements. What we do, we engage them, right? So we want to run a project to deploy that new system through to some functions, and then we get all of the resources that require all of the functionalities. As soon as that system's employed, we get them to obviously test it, etc., and see if it's fit for purpose, right? Because it doesn't necessarily always say what it says on the tin, because the moment it gets into that business, you have to marry both the operations requirements to the functionality of the actual software. So all of these little issues, left, right, and center, will come up. Now, the essence for a project manager will be to manage the process, right? A project manager doesn't manage change. A time manager manages change. Why? Because change is always what? It's transient. Okay? So, if you have a constraint of time, who is the best individual to manage everybody in respect of their time? From a process, system, framework perspective, it would always be what? A project planner. So this is why it's a discipline in itself, and it's separated from project management. Project management is ideally just a series of processes that have been developed based on your day-to-day business life, day-to-day personal lives. It's just been given a conceptual notion of what you can do, and they've given it acronyms, so it sounds like it's complicated. But ideally, these are all processes that have been done for thousands of years. Okay? So all it is, and the reason why I wanted to go that direction is, I strip it down to the bare basics, right? Because anything to do with approach or strategy or methodology has to do with a uniqueness of how you plan ahead, okay? For tasks, activities that you will ideally partake in the future. Now, if you attach strategy to it, that tells you that you are creating a unique style in how you are going to carry out the method, and the methods that you use will eventually direct how that process obviously gets performed, okay, using the right tools and techniques. Now, the tools you'll use are usually your ability to actually time manage, your ability to attach stochastic measurements, i.e. numerical. From a numerical perspective, what I mean is you need to think from the concept of, if I'm to conceptualize my coming here today, you could say in 4 different ways. I got up this morning, I knew I had to get here by 1 o'clock. From my perspective, I've got to be here by 1 o'clock, but I've arrived at 2 o'clock. Would that say I didn't time plan properly? Possibly, yeah. Now, What if I did time plan properly and I eventually met with traffic? Did I risk manage that traffic into it? Possibility is I might have, but then I still got caught in traffic regardless, okay? Now, all the eventualities, all the risks associated with that, i.e. I might have taken a shortcut route, the sat-nav tells me something different, and I end up going round and round in circles. All of these eventualities can actually happen, okay? So, from the perspective of approach, you also need to add in the perspective of risk. So, approach and risk are the skill sets that you guys will need to start taking on board and how to apply a numerical viewpoint into what it is that you do. So, we move on basically to the description of basically what planning is, yeah? And why you have a need for planning, basically. It's the transient nature of a project and often requires a series of strategies in the form of basically how you plan to accomplish the work, okay? So it incorporates all of the resources, the costs, the people, the skill sets associated with how the project is to be delivered, okay? So from that perspective, a basic description will be planning as the process, as described there, based on resource, method. As I said, method is just methodology, approach, etc. That's all it is, yeah? Pretty straightforward. Strip it down to the bare basics. It's you literally thinking about options, assumptions of how to develop various motives to achieve project delivery, okay? So, if you look at, say for instance, give me an example of a very complex project that you might think, wow, how do we actually carry this out? In your daily lives, at work, you've run a series of projects at work before. Just anybody give an example of any of those projects that you've run at work. It could be anything. It could be anything. Just throw it out there.
Construction of substations.
Okay, so what would the first thing for you to think about when you said construction of substations? What perspective are you looking at it as? The performance or the actual person who requires the service? Performance.
The contract.
Okay, so now, do you understand the process that it's taken to get that particular idea of the substation, obviously which was driven by a need for that service, to when it lands on your lap in form of a tender? Can you outline the process? The possibility is... Yeah.
Yeah, so first it would be the environment.
Yep.
And then the requirement, the power requirement for
Okay.
of the different parts of this particular country.
Okay.
The tender. And then it would be, basically the power requirement for all the different areas.
Okay.
And then what they're trying to achieve in terms of the upgrade of that power.
All right. Interesting perspective. Now, what I'd like you guys to obviously just take a second to read through this, right, real quick, right up to that bit there. And then I want to get your idea of what you think planning is. In your own words. Forget all the jargon that I've written there. As I've just discussed with you guys, yeah? Risk, threats, opportunities, yeah? You've got to identify them to literally know whether or not you can manage the risks associated with the endeavor that you're about to partake in or deliver, yeah? So think about it from a risk perspective, from a method perspective, from a strategy perspective. If you don't get the correct definition of planning from the onset, you may proceed thinking all you're doing is sitting on a computer and typing in information to create a Gantt chart. That's not planning. Planning is a discipline of putting things into concepts, developing those concepts, looking at options, assumptions of how you can actually carry out that work in a variety of different ways that will achieve, obviously, optimum performance, produce to the right quality. From a quality perspective, you satisfy what? The functional requirements of the quality and the technical requirements of the quality. You all have phones, right? So you're running a project, and you need to provide a series of different components or elements within a phone. And that phone at the end of it needs to what? What's the function of the phone? To answer calls. What's the technical aspects of your iPhones? It's got picture message. It's got voice recording. It's got all sorts of different bits, right? So if you satisfy the basic function, which is just a function, i.e. from a technical perspective, from a quality perspective, but you don't satisfy the technical aspects of the phone, have you achieved or provided the actual service to the right quality standards? Would that be a yes or no?
No.
Okay. Think of projects as that. And think of your requirements, your job, your role, your specific skill sets. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to add value? Is that what you should be doing? Adding value, or just performing your task as a planner? If you don't add value to a team, what happens? How can you identify if you add value when you don't actually know what the value stream of the actual project is? Yeah. Performance can be viewed from two different perspectives, okay? Performance can be viewed as performing tasks, or performance can be viewed as quality, yeah? Interchanging, yeah? So, if you perform, if you don't have quality standards set, you've still performed.
So you need to set criteria.
Yes.
Set your criteria for performance.
That's it, from the onset. So the first thing you need to do as a project planner, that's it. You look at your work and you say, okay, this is the problem we have to solve. First of all, I need to make sure that from my perspective, I have the right capacity, right capability, right approach, right skill set, right strategy, yeah, to actually carry out my set of activities, right? Now, all it is, grand picture, we've got a project, we need to execute this project. Who's going to do it? It's team effort, not you one. But what your job is to sit in with the whole team. All of you are subject matter experts in your own fields, right? So all of you are going to give some form of contribution, either information, skill set, ideas, a brainstorming session for how we're going to solve this problem that is in front of us, right? Remember I said it's a problem solving or creation of a solution. That's what a project is, okay? So from those two perspectives, you need to look at it and say, what are you going to do? Yeah, it's a team effort. I need to identify with what you do. I need to identify with what he does. Now, the approach is, we call this, or I call it, pull planning, right? Which is, I don't know anything about this project, possibly, but I want to understand what everybody's roles are. And I need to understand what they need to deliver on in order for me to get my piece of information that goes into my tools and the techniques that I use to provide the output, which is I give everybody, at the end of my work stream, I give everybody what? A general picture from a bird's eye view of what all of you are going to do. So all of your method statements, you'd have to put down, outlining how you're carrying out your task. So I'm saying people. It could be companies, right, with specific expertise. So all of you, each individual company is doing something. So collectively, we have a product at the end of it. But each of you is a sub-product, because your sub-product is either dependent or interdependent in the grand scheme of the cycle that we are going to go through from start to finish. So it's an understanding of everybody's requirements from a cyclical perspective, looking at all of the processes required for you to do your work, right the way through till the end of the project to provide us with a solution. Okay? So that's the concept I want us to look at this as. It will always be best to obviously understand it from this perspective as opposed to understanding it from a text-based perspective, right? Because you can't relate it to text. I've written all that stuff, but if you ask me, I can sum it up straight away. But it's all about the approach, the mindset that you guys actually use to impact what it is you're going to get out of all these people. So the most important thing, or the most important attribute that I would expect eventually, is you ask what? The right question. And you will always do what? Get the right answer. Believe it or not, all the information you're going to get is always going to be what? Disparate. That's another key term that you have to put down. Yeah, so the idea is disparate information is converted into information that's what? Practical, achievable, makes sense, is robust, is dynamic, flexible as well. Because things change during the project. Right? So you have to what? Make sure that your skill set is able to take in on that adaptability. Okay, so it's a revolving cycle. You make sure whatever inputs come in, you have to be adaptable because things will change. You have to have a process, system, skill set to recognize that there's a change, monitor that change, jot it down, make sure that before it goes into another process, you're not losing waste within that particular process, right? Because you've taken it down and you know the perspective of what change that's unrecorded further down the line, at some point, it will damage what? The quality, right? Yeah, that's the perspective. So just be on top of the game, basically. Understand that majority of what you will get in this industry as a planner is disparate information. So it's now left to you to use that concept and strategy to take it away and move and develop options, assumptions, different variances, etc. to achieve the goal of total project planning. Okay? So, did I give you guys a second to read this already? Yeah? Okay. Shad, scroll down, please. Okay, stop there. So as I said up there, stop. What does strategy have to do with planning, and why is it a key attribute? You will need to develop this. That's the most important skill set I can give you. Okay? So from a strategy perspective, what does it entail? What you as an individual, you strategize day in, day out. Okay? So when you have to attach process to what you do and a methodology, yeah? What that means is you're strategizing, isn't it? Because you're giving yourself key terms or key performance indicators or particular milestones by which you need to achieve stuff by. So if you attach process to it, you're attaching methodology to it. Okay? So if you attach a methodology, doing or performing a particular task in a particular type of way, that is strategy. Right? Because you're looking at arriving at a predefined result. Why? Because you performed that task in a particular set of actions to get from input to output. And that's always the basis by which you do planning. Okay? So you also have to be flexible. So you have a series of different ways you can look at something and say, okay, if we do it this way, using these methods, this is where we end up. If we do it this way, doing these different methods, this is where we end up. So it's just a collective, but you have the answers to everybody's problems. Do you get it? You have the answers. Ultimately, you will develop it by the end of the course. I'm telling you that much. You will develop it. So you would look at somebody with 25 years experience and they tell you we've got a problem. They've got 25 years experience, but they can't solve the problem. But they've seen this many a times. Why? Because it falls out of the remit of their skill set. So as far as they're concerned, pay somebody to do it. That's why you all are here, because believe you me, they are paying people to do this method of thinking. Stupid money to do this method of thinking. Why? Because not everybody is creative to that level. So it's about how you think, your thought process, how you decide obviously to apply that skill set to planning. Okay? So I'll move on swiftly, but I needed to get that out. So you guys understand the basis of which you're going to do everything else from now till however long you decide to stay on the course. Some people will leave. That's a given. Yeah? Okay, so a lot of this stuff is actually already on the website, yeah? So I don't want to delve too much into... This is all... Go to the other page. That second one. Attributes. Yeah, that one. Yeah. Let's just take a 5-minute break. Yeah.